Right now, somewhere in your home, there is a lighter, or a stove, or a box of matches in a drawer you never think about. You could make fire in under 1 second. You wouldn't even look up while doing it. Now imagine that lighter is the only one on Earth. There are no others. None will ever be made. If it goes out, it is gone forever. That was the reality for ancient humans. Fire was not a tool you used. Fire was a thing you kept alive, like a pet, like a child, like a member of the family. And it could die. Rain could kill it. Wind could kill it. A river crossing could kill it in 3 seconds. One careless step could kill it. And when the fire died, people died with it. So here's the question almost nobody asks. When the storm came, and it always came, how did they carry fire through it? Because they did. For hundreds of thousands of years, in rain, in snow, across rivers and mountains, early humans moved fire from place to place without ever letting it go out. The method they invented is one of the most brilliant things our species has ever done, and you have probably never heard of it. Let's start with the thing that makes all of this make sense. Losing fire was not an inconvenience. It was a countdown. Think about what fire actually did for prehistoric survival. It kept the cold off your body at night. It kept leopards and hyenas outside a circle roughly 30 feet wide. It made meat safe to eat. It softened roots and tubers that were basically inedible raw. That last one matters more than people realize. Cooked food gives you far more usable calories than raw food. Your gut doesn't have to work as hard. Your body gets the energy almost for free. Take fire away, and you don't just get cold. You get hungrier. You get weaker. You get slower. And a slow human in the Ice Age is a dead human. But here's the part that will bother you for the rest of this video. The biggest threat to a fire was never rain. It was something far more common. And I'll show you exactly what it was in a few minutes. First, understand how fragile this thing really was. A campfire looks strong. It roars. It throws sparks. It feels permanent. It is not. A fully burning fire is a machine that eats constantly. It needs fuel every few minutes. It needs oxygen flowing through it. It needs a dry base underneath it. Take away any one of those and it collapses fast. Now try to pick that machine up and walk 20 miles with it. You can't. You cannot carry a flame. Flame is the loudest, hungriest, most unstable form fire takes. Wave a torch in a strong wind, and it either goes out or it burns through your fuel in minutes. And you don't have unlimited fuel in your hands. So the entire problem of moving fire comes down to one impossible-sounding question. How do you carry something that must keep burning without letting it actually burn? Ancient humans solved this, and the solution is genuinely strange. Here's the thing that stopped me cold when I first learned it. In many groups, the person carrying the fire was not the strongest hunter. It was often a child, or an older woman, or someone who couldn't hunt anymore. Someone whose job was simply this: walk, and do not let it die. Picture that for a second. A 10-year-old walking behind the group holding a small container. Inside it, a single glowing lump the size of a walnut. That lump is the reason everyone eats tonight. It is the reason nobody freezes. It is the reason the baby survives the week. And it is entirely in that child's hands. No pressure at all. That is what responsibility looked like for 100,000 years. If videos like this one make you see the past differently, subscribe. This channel is built entirely around the parts of prehistoric humans that history class skipped. Now, let me show you what was actually inside that container. The secret is a type of burning most people have never thought about. There are 2 ways things burn. The first is flaming combustion. That's your campfire. Bright, fast, hungry. The second is smoldering combustion. That's an ember. And an ember is a completely different animal. An ember doesn't need much oxygen. It doesn't need constant fuel. It burns from the inside out, slowly, at a lower temperature. A flame is a sprinter. An ember is a marathon runner. And a marathon runner is what you need when the next shelter is 15 miles away. Watch a barbecue sometime and you'll see it happen in real time. The flames die down and everyone assumes the fire is finished. Then you notice the coals are still glowing an hour later. That's not leftover fire. That's the real fire, doing what it does best. A properly prepared ember can stay alive for hours with almost no air at all. Some can last most of a day. This is the entire foundation of firekeeping. Our ancestors were not carrying fire. They were carrying potential fire, a seed, a sleeping version of it. And a sleeping fire is a fire the weather cannot easily find. But you still can't just grab a hot coal and start walking. There's a specific material involved, and it changes everything. Try this thought experiment. Take a normal coal out of a fire and put it in a pouch. What happens? Within 20 minutes, it's a cold, black rock. Normal wood coals burn hot and die fast. They're made of dense material that either flares up or shuts down. So early humans needed something better. They needed a fuel that burns badly. Read that again, badly. They wanted material that refuses to flame, refuses to burn fast, and just sits there, glowing stubbornly for hours. And here's the beautiful part. Nature is full of it. It's lying on the forest floor right now. Most people walk past it every single day and see nothing. It's soft, it's light. It's usually damp on the outside. It looks like garbage, and it is one of the most important materials in the history of primitive technology. It's called punkwood, and once you understand it, you'll understand how the whole system worked. Punkwood is rotten wood, specifically wood that fungus has been eating for years. The fungus breaks down the dense structure inside the log. What's left is soft, spongy, and full of tiny air pockets. Snap a piece and it crumbles like dry cake. Now dry that out and drop an ember into it. It doesn't burst into flame, it just glows and keeps glowing. The air pockets feed it just barely enough oxygen to survive, and never enough to flare. It's the perfect slow fuel. This is what hunter-gatherers across the entire planet independently figured out. Not one group, not one region, everywhere. Siberia, Africa, the Americas, Europe, Australia. Different people, different languages, same solution. When you see the same answer appear all over the world, that tells you something. It tells you the problem was universal. Everyone needed to move fire, and nature only gave one good answer. But punkwood wasn't the best material available. There was something better, and it grows on the side of a tree. Look at the trunk of an old birch tree in northern Europe, and you might see a hard, gray, hoof-shaped growth sticking out of the bark. It looks like a horse's hoof glued to the wood. That's tinder fungus, Fomes fomentarius. And it might be the single most valuable object in Stone Age life that nobody talks about. Cut it open and you find a layer inside that's soft and brown, almost like suede. Our ancestors learned to slice that layer out, beat it flat, and sometimes soak it and dry it. The result is a material that catches a spark almost instantly. Touch one tiny spark to it and it starts glowing. Then it holds that glow for a very long time. People carried pieces of this fungus the way you carry a phone charger. It was standard kit. It was survival gear. It was, in a real sense, the original battery. And we know that for certain because a man died in the Alps 5,000 years ago, and he was carrying it. In 1991, 2 hikers in the Alps found a body in the ice. They thought it was a lost climber. It wasn't. It was Ötzi the Iceman, a man who died around 5,300 years ago, high in the mountains, and got frozen so fast that he was preserved almost perfectly. His skin, his clothes, his stomach contents, his weapons, everything. For archaeologists, this was like finding a photograph of the past. Because Ötzi wasn't a body in a grave, arranged by other people. Ötzi was a man caught mid-journey. Whatever he was carrying because he needed it that day. And when they went through his gear, they found something that answers our question directly. This is the closest thing we will ever get to a receipt for how ancient humans moved fire. And what was in his pouch is smarter than most people expect. Ötzi was carrying a small container made of birch bark. Inside it were charcoal fragments, wrapped in fresh maple leaves. Think about what that means. He wasn't carrying wood to build a fire. He was carrying fire itself. The leaves were damp and green, which insulates the coals and slows the burn. The bark container held it all together. And separately, he carried pieces of tinder fungus, plus lumps of pyrite. Pyrite is the rock that throws sparks when you strike it right. So his kit had two systems. System 1, an ember, already alive, ready to be woken up. System 2, a spark kit, in case the ember died. A primary and a backup. 5,300 years ago, a man walking alone in the mountains had redundancy built into his fire system. That is not caveman thinking. That is engineering. But there's a detail in his container that reveals the real trick. Why birch bark? This is where early humans show their understanding of materials. Birch bark is naturally waterproof. It's loaded with oily compounds that repel water, which is why birch bark peels off in sheets and stays intact on the forest floor for years after the tree has rotted away. Rain runs off it. It doesn't soften. It doesn't sag. And it's flexible enough to be folded and stitched into a container without cracking. So you have a lightweight, waterproof, sewable box, available free from a common tree. There's a reason bark containers show up again and again in the archaeological record. Now stack the layers: waterproof outer shell, insulating green leaves or moss, ash in the middle, ember at the core. Every single layer is doing a job. And that layered structure is what let people walk into weather that should have killed the fire instantly. But rain was never the main enemy. Here's what actually killed fires. Remember the loop from earlier? The biggest threat wasn't rain, it was wind. And wind is dangerous in a way that feels backwards. You'd think wind kills a fire by blowing it out. Sometimes it does, but more often, wind does the opposite. It feeds it. A gust forces oxygen into the ember, and the ember burns hot and fast. Now your slow-burning walnut of fuel becomes a bright coal that eats itself in 15 minutes instead of 6 hours. The fire doesn't get extinguished, it gets spent. You open your container at camp and find nothing but gray ash and a warm smell. That is how most fires were lost, not in a dramatic downpour, quietly, on a windy afternoon, while everyone was walking and talking and thinking about dinner. Which is exactly why the container design matters so much, and why the mouth of it was always small. The container was never a wide open bowl. It was a tube, a horn, a pot, a folded pouch with a narrow opening, sometimes packed with moss at the top. The point was to strangle the airflow. Just enough oxygen to keep the ember alive, never enough to let it wake up properly. This is a real balancing act. Too little air and it suffocates. Too much and it burns out. The people carrying it learned to read it by feel, by the warmth against their side, by the thin thread of smoke coming out of the top, by smell. If the smoke thickened, the ember was running hot, and they'd pack it tighter. If the warmth faded, they'd open it slightly and blow, gently, once. Not a big breath, a whisper of air. Managing a traveling ember was a skill you developed over years. It was a genuine craft. And like any craft, it was taught. Children watched, children copied, children got it wrong and were corrected. Somewhere out there, thousands of generations back, there was a first person who worked this out, and a second person who was patient enough to explain it. And there was one more variable that changed everything about how they carried it: their own bodies. Here's something that sounds obvious once you hear it. The ember container was usually carried close to the body, under a cloak, against the ribs, slung at the hip beneath fur. And that's not just convenience. Your body is a heat source that runs constantly at around 37 degrees Celsius. In freezing air, an ember loses heat to the environment fast. Tucked against a warm torso, under insulating hide, it loses heat much slower. The human carrying the fire became part of the insulation system. You and the ember shared warmth. It kept you a little warm, you kept it a little warm. There is something quietly beautiful about that. For most of prehistoric survival, a human being was literally a walking incubator for the thing that kept the species alive. But hugging an ember to your chest creates a new problem when the weather turns. And it's not the one you're thinking of. When a storm hits, the danger isn't just water landing on the container. It's water in the air. Humidity soaks into everything. Moss gets damp, bark gets slick, your furs get heavy, and the moisture creeps inward toward the core. When water reaches a hot ember, it doesn't just cool it, it steams. That steam displaces oxygen and drops the temperature at the same time. An ember can die from the inside without a single drop touching it directly. So what did they do? They went low and they went dry. They tucked under overhangs. They pressed against rock faces. They used their own backs as walls. They kept the container on the downwind side of their body. And crucially, they kept spare dry tinder somewhere completely separate, never in the same pouch. Because if one system got wet, the other one had to still be alive. That principle, keep your backups apart, is the oldest survival skill there is. Now here's the moment that decided lives: the river crossing. A group is moving. The water is chest deep and cold. Everyone has to get across, and someone is holding the fire. Watch how they solve it. The ember container goes up, above the head, in one hand. The other hand is for balance, which means the person carrying fire crosses the river with almost no ability to catch themselves. If they slip, they have a choice to make in half a second: save yourself or save the fire. And the honest answer is that both choices were made in different moments by different people. This is the kind of decision ancient humans faced routinely, and we have completely forgotten about. Not a dramatic hunt, not a battle, just a cold river, a heavy pack, and a small, glowing thing you cannot let touch the water. And after they crossed, there was still one job left before dark, the hardest one. Carrying fire during the day was only half the problem. The other half was the night. Because a fire has to survive 8 hours of sleep, too, and nobody is awake to feed it. So they developed a technique that is still used by people today: banking the fire. Here's how it works. You let the fire burn down to a bed of hot coals. Then you rake the ash over the top and bury them. The ash does two things at once. It insulates the coals, holding the heat in, and it blocks most of the oxygen, so the coals can't burn fast. Done right, you can walk away and come back 8 or 10 hours later, scrape the ash off, add dry tinder, blow once, and the fire comes back to life. It looks like resurrection. It isn't. It's just physics, understood deeply by people with no written language. And the word we use for the end of the day comes directly from this practice. The word is curfew. It comes from Old French, couvre-feu. It literally means cover the fire. In medieval towns, a bell would ring in the evening, and that was the signal. Cover your fires. Bank them down. The day is over. The word survived. The meaning changed completely. Today, curfew means stay inside. Originally, it meant protect the coals. Think about how deep this practice runs. It shaped a word that we still use in dozens of languages thousands of years after most of us stopped needing to bank a fire at all. That's how central firekeeping was to daily life in the Stone Age and every age after it. Fire wasn't part of the routine. Fire was the routine. The day started when you woke it up and ended when you put it to sleep. But this raises the obvious objection, the one you've probably been thinking for the last 10 minutes. Why not just make a new fire? Rub two sticks together, right? Everyone knows that one. So let's kill this myth properly. Friction fire is real. The bow drill and the hand drill work, but they work under conditions. You need a bone-dry spindle, you need a bone-dry hearth board of the right wood, you need bone-dry tinder to catch the coal, you need a cord that isn't soaked, and you need the strength and technique to keep going for minutes without stopping. Now take all of that into a rainstorm. Everything on the ground is wet. Everything in the air is wet. Your hands are numb. Your cord is stretched and slick. Under those conditions, friction fire isn't hard. It's close to impossible. Modern primitive technology practitioners with years of experience will tell you the same thing. Wet weather is where fire starting goes to die. And that's the whole reason carrying an ember mattered so much. What about sparks? Ötzi had pyrite, remember? Strike pyrite against flint and you get hot fragments flying off. That's a real fire starting method, and a good one. But look at what a spark actually is. It's a tiny particle burning for a fraction of a second. It has almost no heat energy. It has to land on perfectly prepared, perfectly dry tinder to become anything at all. In a storm, you have no perfectly dry tinder unless you've been protecting it all day. The spark isn't the hard part. The tinder is the hard part. This is why every serious firekeeping kit was really a tinder management system. The spark tools were simple. The tinder was precious. It was kept dry against the body, wrapped, sealed, sometimes carried inside a hollow bone or horn with a stopper. And it explains something strange in the archaeological record. Some groups had extraordinary fire skills. Others, apparently, had almost none. Take the Neanderthals. They used fire. That's not in question. Their sites have hearths, burnt bone, ash layers. But there's a long-running debate about whether they could reliably start fire on demand, or mostly kept it going once they had it. And there's a fascinating clue in the record. At some Neanderthal sites in France, archaeologists found blocks of manganese dioxide. The usual assumption was body paint, black pigment. But there were other black pigments available that were easier to get. So researchers tested manganese dioxide with wood. Ground into powder and mixed with tinder, it lowers the temperature at which wood ignites and speeds up combustion. In other words, it makes fire easier to start. It's a fire additive. That's not decoration, that's chemistry. 400,000 years before chemistry had a name. But if fire could be that hard to make, was there ever a group that simply didn't make it? There was. In the Bay of Bengal sit the Andaman Islands. The people living there were isolated for an extraordinarily long time. And when outsiders described them in detail in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they recorded something remarkable. According to those accounts, the islanders did not make fire from scratch. They kept it, constantly, permanently, without interruption. Fires burned in camps that were never allowed to go out. When groups traveled, they carried smoldering wood with them. When they moved camp, fire moved with them. And if a family's fire ever failed, they went to a neighbor and got a light. Now, these accounts come from outside observers, and researchers still debate exactly what they mean. But the picture they paint is one of the most striking ideas in human history. A society where fire was inherited, not created. Where every flame anyone used was directly descended from a flame that came before it. An unbroken chain, possibly stretching back thousands of years. Think about what that actually implies. It implies that fire could be a relationship rather than a resource. Something passed hand to hand, generation to generation. And it implies a chilling possibility. That a group could lose the ability to make fire and survive anyway, as long as they never dropped it. There's a related and much debated case in Tasmania. When Europeans arrived, some accounts suggested the Tasmanians relied on keeping and transporting fire rather than making it easily from scratch. Historians and archaeologists still argue about it, but the deeper point stands on its own. Technology is not permanent. Skills can be lost. Populations that get small enough or isolated enough can forget things their ancestors knew. We tend to imagine progress as a staircase that only goes up. It isn't. It's more like a rope you have to keep holding. And ancient humans understood this instinctively, which is exactly why the ember mattered. Because the ember was the rope. Now let's go to Australia, where fire carrying became something else entirely. Aboriginal Australians traveled with fire sticks, and the plants of the continent gave them exactly what they needed. Certain banksia cones, once lit, smolder slowly for hours without flaming. Dense, woody, full of small chambers. Basically a natural, slow-burning fuel cell. Carry one, and you carry fire across country all day. And they didn't just carry fire. They used it to shape the land. Controlled burning cleared undergrowth, encouraged new growth, drew grazing animals into predictable places, and reduced the fuel that feeds catastrophic wildfires. That is landscape management, practiced for thousands of years, using a stick that glows. So think about what a fire stick actually was. It was a heat source. It was a signal. It was a hunting tool. It was a farming tool. One object, 5 jobs. And it changes how you should think about the word primitive. But fire's biggest role wasn't practical at all. Fire was social. Here's a scenario that played out constantly for hundreds of thousands of years. Your fire dies. Weather, bad luck, a mistake, it's gone. You don't sit down and start drilling wood in the rain. You walk to the next group. And you ask. Almost universally, among hunter-gatherers, fire was shared on request. Refusing it was close to unthinkable, because the person asking today might be the person you ask next winter. That is an insurance system. No paperwork, no currency, no contracts, just a shared understanding, held across generations, that fire moves toward whoever needs it. And every time an ember crossed from one camp to another, it created a thread between those two groups. Obligation, memory, connection. Now scale that up over thousands of years, networks of families connected by borrowed fire. That's not just survival. That's the beginning of society. And it worked because the cost of giving was almost nothing. Handing over an ember doesn't reduce your fire at all. You lose nothing. They gain everything. It might be the single best trade humans ever invented, and it explains why letting the fire die carried a weight far beyond the practical. Look at how seriously later cultures took this. In ancient Rome, the Vestal Virgins were priestesses whose central duty was to maintain a sacred flame in the Temple of Vesta. That fire was tied to the safety of the entire city. If it went out, it was treated as a catastrophic omen, and the priestess responsible could be punished severely for the failure. A city with metalwork, aqueducts, and a professional army still treated a dying flame as an emergency. Why? Because the instinct was older than Rome, far older. Cultures across the world built rituals around perpetual fires, sacred hearths, flames that must never be allowed to die. That belief did not appear out of nowhere. It is the fossil of a real memory, a time when a fire going out genuinely could end you. The ritual outlived the danger, and that's usually how ritual works. But the deepest effect of carrying fire wasn't social or spiritual. It was inside our heads. Keeping fire alive across days forced a new kind of thinking. To carry an ember successfully, you have to plan. You need to collect punkwood before you need it. You need to dry tinder fungus in advance. You need to check the sky and decide when to pack the container tighter. You need to think about tomorrow's river before you reach it. That is future planning, enforced daily for hundreds of thousands of years. Most animals live almost entirely in the present. Ancient humans could not afford to. The ember demanded attention now for a benefit hours or days later, and it punished you immediately if you got lazy. That's a brutal but effective teacher. Some researchers argue this constant, low-level, forward-looking maintenance is part of what pushed human cognition toward long-range planning. The fire wasn't just keeping us warm, it was training us. And now, let's put the whole thing together, in the middle of the storm. Picture it properly. The sky went gray around midday. The wind picks up and the temperature falls fast. You're 4 hours from the next shelter, and there's no going back. The rain starts sideways. You pull your fur tighter, and underneath it, against your ribs, there is a small bark container. You can feel the warmth of it through your clothing. You check the top. A thin line of smoke. Steady. Pale. Good. It's breathing right. The moss at the mouth is damp now, so you press it down slightly to slow the air. You keep the container on the sheltered side of your body, and you angle your shoulder into the wind. You walk. Every 20 minutes, you check it again. Not with your eyes, with your hand. Warm means alive, and you keep walking, into weather that should have taken it from you. You reach the overhang at dusk. Under the rock, the ground is dry. You clear a patch. You pull out the tinder you've kept sealed and separate all day. You open the container. Inside, under the ash, there's a dull orange glow the size of a thumbnail. Almost nothing. You lay it into the tinder bundle, fold it closed, and breathe. Once. Slowly. From low in your chest. The bundle darkens. Then smoke. Then more smoke. Then it catches. And a fire that started somewhere far behind you, days or weeks or possibly generations ago, is alive again in a new place. That is the answer to the question. Ancient humans carried fire through storms by never carrying flame at all. They carried a sleeping fire, wrapped in layers, fed just enough air to dream, and woke it up when it was safe. That is the technology. Waterproof bark, rotten wood, fungus, ash, moss, body heat, patience, and one person who refused to let it go out. So go back to that lighter in your drawer, the one you'd never think twice about. Every fire you have ever seen is, in a sense, the end of that chain. Somewhere behind it is an unbroken line of people who carried embers, up mountains, across rivers, through snow and rain and wind, for hundreds of thousands of years. They walked with fire pressed against their bodies because the alternative was unthinkable. They handed it to their children. Their children handed it on. Until one day, someone put it in a small plastic tube and sold it for almost nothing. We didn't just invent convenience. We ended a job that had existed since before we were fully human. Nobody carries the fire anymore. The oldest job our species ever had is simply gone, and nobody held a ceremony for it. And almost nobody remembers that anyone ever did. If this changed how you see a single flame, there's another story you need to hear. Because fire solved the cold and the dark, but it created a problem our ancestors never expected. That video is on screen now. Go watch it.